we can't escape it, Hawk Watchers. Despite our best efforts, apparently the road to the 2020 presidential election has already started for most cable newsrooms and political pundits, despite the actual election still sitting roughly 2 years away. And while all the talking heads and partisan think pieces debate who looks the best, who represents the most, and who's born to run, one debate that gets lost in the dog and pony show is why does it always have to come down to just a Democrat and a Republican? Since 1852, it has been either a Democrat or a Republican sitting in the White House, and these two parties have controlled Congress since at least 1856. So what stands in the way of a true third, fourth, or fifth party movement? And just what goes into the monumental task of building a brand new political party? Well, we're joined today by the former National Political Outreach Coordinator for Bernie 2016, Nick Braña, who's actually trying to do just that, build a new political party from the ground up. Thank you for joining us, Nick.
Great to be with you, Tabetha, Tyrel, on Watching the Hawks.
Thank you, thank you. You know, it's interesting. You've undertaken a monumental task. You founded what's called the Movement for a People's Party, and what does the People's Party stand for, and what was the inspiration for you to kind of take this on? Because I cannot imagine that building a new party in the United States of America today is an easy job.
No, it's not, but it's a necessary one. Because the two parties that we have, there was a really remarkable study out of Princeton and Northwestern University a few years ago. It studied 20 years worth of legislation, more than 2,000 pieces, and it looked at the differences between the Democrats and Republicans and how much the public's will actually has an impact on policy. And it found that under the Democrats and Republicans, we don't have a democracy. The quote was that the public's will has a minuscule, near zero, statistically insignificant impact on public policy. And so it's not easy, but it's not impossible either, because the majority of Americans are calling for it at this point, and it's necessary, as shown by that study.
Most definitely. Wow.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in a place right now where you have a lot of old guard who thought you could still keep thinking you can do the things that they did in a pre-internet age, like going back to the 90s, where they didn't have as much, it was just the birth of the internet, so they didn't have to face as much from actual constituents. So I feel like the whole system, like you said, is set up in this way that it doesn't matter. Once you vote, that's the end of. They don't care what you have to say. And I think that's what's kind of amazing, is that you're going up on this challenge that is monumental to create a better version of something that we've only had for like a couple hundred years and it hasn't really worked. What were things that, first, how do you even start? How do you even begin to do this? And what were some of the challenges that you faced that you didn't expect when you first went into this process of building a brand and building this political party?
Well, it needs to be done from the bottom up, from the grassroots up. And so I got together recently, about a month ago, with labor leaders, including leaders at the highest levels of American labor, AFL-CIO executive council members, other progressive leaders. Cornel West, for example, is an endorser of ours, and as is Chris Hedges, as is Oliver Stone, as is Ed Asner, and many others, thousands of other working people, and 15 organizations actually. We're part of a coalition of 15 different organizations representing more than 100,000 members, bringing together unions and social movements to create this new party. So we've built substantially. And to answer your question, we've seen that what we need to do is we need to start at the local level by running state and local candidates, building up a kind of a proto-party, so to speak, of candidates that can then become a major new party as we move forward to this process.
That is fascinating, and I think a lot of people...
I can't even get a book club going. So the fact that you're doing an entire political party, I commend you on so many levels, because I think people at home don't understand. Like, it's not as easy as just being like, we'll run a third-party candidate. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, you're
not at all.
Commend to you.
Because a lot of times, a lot of these hurdles that the third party faces, I know, because my father was a very big third party advocate, still is, and a lot of the hurdles he faces, you're talking about, the Democrats and Republicans have really insulated the game to be their own. So, third parties have to get X amount of signatures. They have to jump through all these hoops just to get on a ballot. Yeah. How do you plan on challenging that? Because they've put up probably they're not going to give up their power and their consolidation of that power easily.
They've tried, but there comes a point where the scales of the balance of the power of money and the balance of corporate power and the people's desire for a major new party tips into where they can spend unlimited sums of money, but people just aren't buying it anymore. And we're kind of reaching that juncture. The fact that in 2016 you saw that in the two major parties, people basically led a revolt in both of them by trying to nominate two candidates who weren't even members of the party. Before that, Trump and Sanders.
Yeah.
And so part of that shift in consciousness and the revolution, too, is that over the past 15 years, you've seen tens of millions of people leave the Democratic and Republican parties and become independents. So now independents are almost half the country, whereas there's only about a quarter of Democrats, a quarter of Republicans. So that means that it become kind of unstable, and the ground opens for a major new party because there's just like a chasm of independence and non-representation. And what you said earlier was such a great point, because the internet has changed everything. In countries in Europe and in Latin America, several countries, there are new parties that are coming up on the left and the right, and they are dislodging and throwing out establishment parties that have been in power literally for decades. And that's happening just in the last 3 and 4 years, powered by the internet.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, if I had even a tenth of the amount of internet access and news through that and information in the late 90s, I wouldn't have voted for Bill's re-election. I can tell you that much. But that brings me to this other point, because as someone who I don't belong to political parties, I feel like that sort of, like, I'm not a good joiner and that kind of stuff, and then being told what to do. I have an issue with authority. But one of the things that I always see is that, look, the Republicans and the Democrats, for all their faults, they have a huge infrastructure. They've been here for a long time. They have brand recognition. Why not, instead of building an opposition party, take that and just take over the Democratic Party and make it progressive, make it what it should be? Why not do that?
That's a great question, and millions of people have been trying to do just that over the past 4 years, in fact. For example, progressives in the Democratic Party, first, I wrote an article a couple of months ago documenting the 7 major attempts that progressives have made to take over the Democratic Party. The first was they tried to nominate a president with Bernie Sanders in 2016. Then they tried to pass a platform, hold the party's feet to the fire, progressive platform. After that, they tried to take the DNC chair position, replace Tom Perez with Keith Ellison. And then they tried, for example, a progressive wave in the midterms, replacing Nancy Pelosi as the House leader, reforming the 2020 rules so that it's more fair for a president. And in each of these instances, the party has not only sabotaged that attempt, but they have consolidated power. Like, for example, in the midterms, when the dust settled of the midterms, there were only 2 progressives who had unseated establishment members of the Democratic Party in Congress. So that is stark compared to the 435 members.
Wow.
Which is weird to me, because the thing is, if you really believe in your ideas, at least ideologically, if you believe that you're the best, if the point is you should, why wouldn't you? If you're so angry that someone didn't vote the way you think they should, then shouldn't it be pretty easy to sell that? There shouldn't be an issue if you're the tent for everybody that they've always been. If you're not a horrible person, you're a Democrat, right? Like, I guess I vote Democrat. Or when I was a kid, we didn't have enough money to vote Republican at the time. It was the Reagan era. We just weren't rich enough.
And as an organization, you need to have democratic mechanisms in place internally, and the Democratic and Republican parties don't have those mechanisms. The leaderships are not elected; they're appointed essentially by the donors. They're appointed by the superdelegates in the case of the Democratic Party, and the platform's totally non-binding. That means that there's a total disconnect between where the leadership of the party is and where the membership or the voters are, and there's no kind of way of the membership influencing the actual institution. It's like saying that the workers should take over Walmart. You know,
Right.
the Walmart is not a democracy.
Right.
Right. This isn't a democracy.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people, you know, you'll hear a lot of doom and gloom, and you'll hear a lot of this, you know, charges of, oh, they're spoilers, or, you know, wasted votes and things of that nature. When you talk about third parties, when we talk about, you know, green, libertarian, and potentially yours. I'm just curious, let's talk about the other side of that. How would the landscape in Washington and local levels and state levels change if we had more than just the two boring options, just these two, you know, Coke and Pepsi options? Do you think there'd be less gridlock? Like, what would the political future hold if we saw more parties in this country?
I think that most people, one of the major things that I've found is that most people absolutely want a major new party. And that's not the issue. You know, that's not what's stopping them. Rather, they're waiting for, you know, kind of a feasible plan. They're waiting for something that they think can really be accomplished. So having another party out there that actually speaks for working people would force the Democratic and Republican parties to, it would provide contrast, you know, and it would force them to either get with the program with all of these policies like Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, 70% top marginal tax rate, infrastructure jobs program, all of these things that have like massive, overwhelming support among Americans. It would force them to either get with that program or they would go extinct.
They'd be voted out, which is what should
did.
happen. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly like the Whigs. You either have to do what they say, an accomplishment, or you got to go.
Or you got to go.
Right.
Braña, I got to say, keep up the great work, keep up the great fight, and I look forward to seeing the people's movement, you know, become a real factor, because I think we need it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tyrel. Thanks, Tabetha.
Thanks.